Order! Order! You are an incorrigible delinquent at times. Behave yourself, man!
Boris Johnson is on his way back from New York to face, well, unprecedented problems in the context of domestic politics. But, of course, in many ways it doesn't matter. It pains me to say this, but everybody listening to this programme, well, I don't know. I'll ask it. I'll do it as a question rather than a statement. Did anybody change their mind about anything as a result of yesterday's ruling in the Supreme Court? I don't know that anybody did. That's what's so weird. The entrenchment, call it what you will, the tribalism, the binary partisanship that Brexit has reduced us to means, as far as I can tell, that if you fell for Boris Johnson's last round of embellishments, exaggerations and deceptions, then you will forgive the current round because he's still somehow dangling a desirable bauble in front of you. And that bauble is called Brexit, and that's as far as you can go. The minute I ask you to explain what that actually means, you can't. So do we begin there today? Has anybody changed their mind about it? I mean, it's astonishing to me to reflect. You know, you probably won't remember this, but I opened yesterday's programme by reminding everybody, including myself, that after the National Crime Agency concluded that Aaron Banks and his Leave.eu outfit had no case to answer in the context of the £8 million worth of loans that he gave to that campaigning movement, I opened the programme yesterday by reminding everybody that your response to that story has to be driven by your respect for the law and, of course, the forces of upholding the law. You can't approach that story with Brexit-flavoured blinkers on. And one would hope that if that is true in one context, then it would be true in the other context. But it isn't. I don't know if 52% of the country now consider Parliament to be too sovereign and British judges in British courts to have too much British power, but it is probably, and I used that word very deliberately, it's probably the best illustration we've had yet of how successful the grooming and the gaslighting has been. Because if we want, let's leave immigration out of it, actually, which is actually quite a nice thing to do in this context, because the only non-immigration reasons given for Brexit, really, were about sovereignty and about courts. You know, even on Monday we took a call from a fellow who claimed that he'd voted to leave the European Union because we hadn't been able to deport the deported terror suspect Abu Hamza. Actually, he's not a suspect anymore, is he? He's been locked up for life. I voted to leave the European Union because that bloke he got deported and he's in prison. Okay. So apart from immigration, there were arguments about sovereignty and law, right? I mean, it's why this programme has become something of a maypole around which people dance, claiming that we can't make our own laws or that we've surrendered too much of our own power. And then, of course, when you tug on the thread of the reasoning or the evidence to support that claim, the whole thing falls apart. Still hasn't got tired, still hasn't got old, apparently. 7 minutes after 10 is the time. So it again puts us in a really tricky position, because you know deep down that the rule of law is sacrosanct, or at least that the rule of law is desperately important. You also, I think, know deep down, I think we all know deep down, don't we, that the judiciary is there as a check and balance on the executive. And that necessity of checking and balancing what the executive does and was doing and had done became acutely important, arguably even urgent, after the executive was suspected of having shut down the legislature on dishonest precepts. The Supreme Court found unanimously yesterday that Boris Johnson had misled the Queen, misled the people, and misled Parliament. Now, I take very little pleasure in this. The only pleasure I take in it is the knowledge that if you listen to this programme with an open mind, then nothing that has happened since June of 2016 should have shocked or surprised you. But, of course, a huge number of people are furious, even with that simple observation. The people really who should be shaking us by the hand and saying thank you are the people who are angriest, because what we've told you has turned out to be true, and what your heroes like Johnson and Farage have told you has turned out to be nonsense. But still you get cross with the people telling you the truth. culminating in people who voted to leave the European Union because they believed that British courts and British judges had somehow surrendered their powers to, quotes, Brussels, end quotes, are today absolutely livid about the fact that British courts and British judges have so much power. Riddle me that. Straight up question. What's true? That we've surrendered our powers to Brussels, 03456060973, or that the Supreme Court yesterday demonstrated that, in your view, British judges in British courts have far too much power? 03456060973. They can't both be true, can they? I don't know. Possibly they can. I'll give you the number again. 03456060973. Yes, our judges have surrendered. We've surrendered far too much power to Brussels, and also we have far too much power still. Yeah, that's what I mean by grooming and gaslighting. These aren't words that I use loosely or thoughtlessly. How else can you explain somebody today with a fully functioning nervous system looking at the political landscape and somehow clinging? This is what doublethink is. Remember when I pointed out to you that Boris Johnson was a prime minister who simultaneously wanted and didn't want an election? That ability to hold two completely conflicting positions in your mind at the same time was described in perfect technicolor by George Orwell. What is it today? You have been reduced, if you're still on the other side of this fence from me, you have been reduced to simultaneously claiming that our judges have lost their power and that they've got too much. And it's not the people that have done this to you that you're getting cross with, it's the people who are pointing it out. On this occasion, I guess, the Supreme Court judges. It is, I said to you, 18 months, 2 years ago? It has ceased to be political and is now entirely psychological. And I don't like saying things like that because, well, it's obviously insulting. Nobody wants to be told that their political convictions are based upon utterly evidence-free psychological impulses, be it, fight or flight, when presented with that disgusting Breaking Point poster, or be it a sort of persecution complex that's been carefully fomented and fostered over a 30-year period, persuading you quite erroneously that our friends and allies over the Channel and indeed over the Irish Sea are somehow on a secret mission to castrate us. I mean, it's absolute nonsense. Undiluted poppycock. Culminating in this doublethink that the country has now been entirely enslaved to. And there's no shame in it. Just have a look at today's front pages, which I'm not going to refer to overmuch today, because I do think that might be part of the problem, as I dedicate my working life to trying to unravel these issues and trying to steer, in some sense, people kind enough to listen to this programme while profoundly disagreeing with me, trying to steer you somehow back to a semblance of sanity. The newspapers, I think, even when you refer to them in a critical and a castigating way, they don't help that process. They reflect. I mean, just very, very briefly, the front page of The Sun today has referenced a joke which was a catchphrase of a comedian who nobody under the age of 40 has ever heard of. Give or take, don't at me, all right? Give or take. That's all you need to know, really, about what the newspapers are doing and continue to do. The idea that this man, and we'll focus, I think, today on the Prime Minister, with a little side order of Jacob Rees-Mogg, who couldn't have been more roundly humiliated, an entire life cultivating a sort of Edwardian pastiche tribute act. 2 minutes in the cabinet, and he's found to have misled the Queen. It's quite incredible how reality burns through these carefully contrived public personas, but still they are forgiven because they dangle before us this bauble of Brexit, which nobody can even describe anymore. We just need to leave. What does that mean? I don't care. Well, I do. Sorry. Not only do I care about what it means for me and mine, I care about what it means for you and yours, even while you furiously scream down the phone that you don't care at all, you just want to get on with it and do it. It's profoundly irresponsible. Do you know the analogy that I'm most reminded of all the analogies that we've explored together over the course of the last 3 or 4 years? We're back to the aeroplane. This will of the people nonsense. If there's 100 people on an aeroplane, 99 of them vote to put a drunk in the cockpit and chuck the pilot out the back door. I will stay in seat B3 screaming blue blooming murder right up until the point that we smash into the side of the mountain. Because I don't care whether I'm the only one left. I know it's a really bad idea to put a drunk in the cockpit and chuck the pilot out the back door. I don't care how many people still persist in pretending that it's a really good idea. So this notion of the will of the people, you crack on cheering the drunk in the cockpit, and I'll crack on reminding you that it's not a very good idea to put a drunk in the cockpit. And Boris Johnson, of course, wasn't even in the cockpit when we first formulated this comparison, this analogy. Now he really is. You know that he lied through his teeth throughout his personal and professional pre-political careers. You just know that he did. He lost his first ever job on the Times for making up quotes from his own godfather. His romantic and sexual history is something that we can't discuss fully on the programme. Make of that what you will. His latest allegations involving a much younger woman and public money being apparently allocated in highly questionable ways. What is there to be surprised about? You know? Even if you're listening to this programme for 47 seconds a day, you'd have picked up enough of this to know exactly what you could expect from this man. And yet here he is, in the cockpit, drunk, with 99 passengers sitting behind him, pretending that this is what they voted for in 2016. What do we want? A drunk in the cockpit. When do we want it? As soon as possible. Let's just get on with it. Well, today, I want you to explain to me or share with me your simple question, your simple answer to this question. If you are still a Brexiter, then fill me in on where you stand regarding judges, okay? Have they currently got too much power in British courts, or have they not got enough power because they've given it all to Brussels? Demi Moore, the Hollywood actress, has published a memoir which oddly opens the door to a magnificent vignette, a beautiful little intervention from one of my favourite actors, actually, John Cryer, who you might know from 2.5 Men, or if you're closer to my age, Pretty in Pink. Demi Moore claims that she took his virginity when they starred in a film together 30 or so years ago. And he has responded in a way that if you haven't seen it, I think will put a smile on your face. That's not what we're talking about today. We're talking about Boris Johnson being found to have misled the Queen, the people and Parliament, and people who know. We took a call, didn't we? Before this happened. I always remember these calls because they seem to me to be milestones in the national decline. Yeah, I know he's a liar, but I don't care. Wow. What's happening? What's happened? And specifically, do British judges have too much power now, or do they not have enough because they've surrendered it all to Brussels? I'm genuinely confused. Raj is in Hackney. Raj, what would you like to say?
Morning, James.
Hello, mate.
First thing I want to say is that one thing that's been obviously reported in the papers this morning is that the Leader of the House of Commons has come out and said that the actions taken by the Supreme Court represent a constitutional coup.
But that would involve Jacob Rees-Mogg criticising judges, wouldn't it?
Yeah, the same judges that we wanted to get power back from Brussels.
No, but I'm reading what you refer to. Sources refused to say whether he had apologised. This was during Boris Johnson's telephone call to the Queen. During a stormy cabinet conference call yesterday, Commons leader Jacob Rees-Mogg accused judges of mounting a constitutional coup. That's what you're referring to.
Yeah, but what people need to realise, and I think what he maybe needs to realise, is we don't have a politicised Supreme Court structure, for example, like the USA has, where nominees are chosen by a ruling party to try and cram a majority, the way that Brett Kavanaugh and Neil Gorsuch were created.
Do you want to know something remarkable, Raj?
I would.
Jacob Rees-Mogg does know that. He understands it perfectly, and guess what? I can prove it.
We have a free press, we have an outspoken press, and it is entitled to attack judges if it disagrees with them. Ministers are not, and had ministers been rude about the judges, the Lord Chancellor would have been right to tell them not to, and members of Parliament in the House of Commons may not attack judges except on a specific motion. So there are controls on the legislature and the executive on how we relate to the judiciary.
Well, this is awkward, Raj.
Well, yeah, we have an independent judiciary that's supposed to be above that kind of approach. So, we've also got... I was watching Sky News this morning, and I think it was Desmond Swain suggesting that we should prorogue a game, which I just find absolutely astonishing. I think that the whole idea that somebody can mislead the monarch, and then afterwards, people in that party, Steve Baker, I think, said something quite similar, saying, this could be something we could go for again. I just find absolutely astonishing. And where's the accountability in all of this?
Well, there isn't any at the moment, and that is the most remarkable thing. There isn't any accountability at the moment. It's it's like a gamble, isn't it? It's like they've bet the house on red, and they're just hoping. I don't even know what the finish line looks like now. I don't know if a crash-out kamikaze, no idea Brexit on October the 31st is even plausible anymore. But they've bet the house on red, and they can't remember why.
Well, but if you go to the casino with 100 grand and you're down to your last 10 grand. You don't just put it. Well, some people do.
Yeah, they do, though. They do, mate.
They do. And I think one of the big issues we've got here is that, I keep hearing from a lot of Brexiteers that we knew what we were voting for. One question I would like to pose to them via this show is, many impact assessments, e.g. Yellowhammer, that
Project Fear, mate. Project Fear.
Yeah, I mean, it's anything that doesn't fit the narrative is Project Fear, even though it comes from within Whitehall.
Well, you know that, and I know that. I'm just telling you what they'll say. Project Fear, Ramona, condescending. How dare you insult my intelligence and tell me that I didn't know what I was voting for? What did you vote for? I've got no idea, but how dare you insult my intelligence by telling me that I didn't know what I was voting for? That's where we are, mate. That's Groundhog Day.
Yes, and that goes to the heart of it, which is people's reluctance to admit that actually it's not about intelligence, it's about what you believe, and that the facts have borne that out.
It's not about evidence or fact, it's about feelings. It has been for ages. And the feeling that we need to leave the European Union is built upon things that aren't true. Built upon the idea that, for example, our judges had surrendered their power to Brussels. Yesterday was an absolutely coruscating demonstration of how much power our judges and our courts have. So the idea, and we've spoken to countless people on this programme who voted to leave the European Union in their own words because we don't make our own laws and because Brussels has too much power over our courts. They have told me that countless times. So when I point out to them that Brussels doesn't have too much power over our own courts, I'm not insulting them. I'm not offending them. I'm not calling them stupid or any of those things. I'm just pointing out that they've made a mistake. We all make mistakes. 24 minutes after 10 is the time, although few of us on quite the scale that Jacob Rees-Mogg has managed during his 2 minutes in the Cabinet. Paul's in Liverpool. Paul, what would you like to say?
Hi, James.
Hello.
Basically, it's just to see a question. I was a Remainer and I haven't changed my mind, so that's pretty sort of cuts your question off straight away.
Well, I can't. I mean, perhaps I was being a little bit rhetorical. Nothing happened yesterday that would prompt somebody who didn't want to leave the European Union to change their mind, would it? Unless I'm really missing a boat.
No, well, it won't, because basically, this is the crux of what I've rang up for, because I'm hearing that Labour voters in the North are prepared to vote Tory and Brexit, the Brexit Party, purely to get their own way. Now, I know what, people should be ashamed of themselves if that's what they do. Fair enough, we live in a democracy, do what you want. If you're going to protest against Labour, just don't vote for them. It's as simple as that. How you can vote for a racist, misogynistic liar in Johnson is just beyond me.
He obviously wouldn't accept that description. But there's, how could you vote for? Jeremy Corbyn has also been accused of racism and misogyny. So I could come back to you and say, well, how can people vote for a racist or an anti-Semitic misogynistic? I don't know if he's a liar.
That's a fair point. Well, I don't think he is. I think basically, no, you're right, and I can't argue with that. And I'm not in here banging the drum for Labour, because they make
I appreciate that.
Gargantuan mistakes as well. What my point is that I can't believe that people will just go against the whole belief system to get what they want, which is Brexit. Now, I'm not going to go down the road of what we all know what Brexit's about. We all know why they voted leave. Can I give it an example?
Well, you can give me one example, but that's only one example. It's not 17.4 million examples. So, I can point you. I can. I can point you at the bloke who voted leave because there were too many brown faces behind the tills in his local Tesco. I can show you the bloke who voted leave because he thought they were going to abolish the 3-pin plug, or the person who voted leave because she wanted to wrap her fish and chips in newsprint and was somehow under the impression that she couldn't because of EU regulations. I could show you Gary on Monday, who loves Boris Johnson because he's going to deliver a Brexit that Gary can't tell you what that Brexit is, but he knows that he wants it. So there's 17.4 million different wrong reasons for having done it.
Yeah. Exactly, I understand. But my point is, like, a fairly basic point is, like a couple of lads I work with who voted leave, very briefly I'll tell you. I just said to them, no, before this referendum, I never heard anyone, apart from people in Parliament saying about, well, leavers in Parliament, saying they wanted to leave the EU. I've never heard any of you say that. Yeah, I went through, so what's going to change for you once we leave? And like Danny would go, well, we'll get our fisheries back, we'll make our own laws. And I went, you work as a process operator in manufacturing. What's fishing got to do with you?
And also that's built on nonsense, as you know. Exactly. The quotas were sold to foreign companies. There's no truth whatsoever in the portrayal of the fishing industry as somehow having been sacrificed on the altar of European Union membership. And the fellow who bangs on about fish more than any other was on the relevant committee in the European Parliament, a fellow by the name of Farage, and I believe he only turned up for 1 out of 20-odd potential meetings where he could have sought to influence policy, but of course he elected not to.
Well, we haven't got 3 hours, so don't get me started on him. But,
I take your point, but you're more than welcome to share. And he's right, those 2 colleagues of his that voted for it because X, Y and Z, when X, Y and Z turn out not to be true, Paul is not calling them stupid. He's not calling them even racist or any of these insults that people on the other side of the argument claim that they're routinely being showered with, while simultaneously claiming, for many of them, that you can't give offence, you can only take it, and why do people need a safe space, and they're such a bunch of snowflakes, while simultaneously saying, stop calling us names that you're not actually calling us, but we might be able to cling on to a shred of credibility in our own minds if we can portray ourselves somehow as victims. I don't think you're stupid, I don't think you're thick, I don't think you're racist. But the people that you voted for do, which is why they conducted their campaigns in the way that they did. I don't think you're stupid, which is why I wouldn't tell you something that wasn't true and expect you to vote for it. They told you something that wasn't true and expected you to vote for it, and you voted for it. So who thinks you're stupid? I don't think you're racist, but if I did, I'd put up a poster of foreign people in a distant land with a headline saying something like Breaking Point on it, and I'd use that to scare you into acting against your own interests by using your vote to massively enrich various investors. But I don't think you're racist, so I condemn that poster. And I don't think you're thick, so I point out the lies. People putting up the posters, the people still telling you the lies, and of course misleading the Queen and misleading our sovereign Parliament. What do they think of you? It's one of those nice programmes today where you can just ring in and chat about politics. 03456060973 is the number you need. I hardly need any questions, but I can't help asking this one because I care about you much, much, much more than the people who conned you do. And that question is, as a Brexiter, could you just remind me whether British courts and British judges have too much power, as evinced by yesterday's unanimous pronouncement from our Supreme Court, or whether they've lost their power to Brussels and that's why we need to leave the European Union? Just one or the other. And if the strain of trying to keep those completely contradictory positions simultaneously inflated, if that is exhausting you, it's really, really easy to stop. It's really easy, and it's never too late just to wake up one morning and go, oh my God, British judges and British courts haven't surrendered their power to Brussels and our Parliament hasn't lost its sovereignty. Therefore, my reasons for voting to leave the European Union were wrong. And I'm going to take out my displeasure on the people that lied to me or misled me. Maybe they didn't realise they were lying. The choice between incompetence and dishonesty is often impossible to make infallibly. So, turns out our Parliament is sovereign and our laws and our judges and our courts are extremely robust. What are you going to do? Step back from that ludicrous position you were led to, or stay on the same side as the man who misled you, misled the Queen, and misled Parliament? It's a simple choice now. Ryan's in Basildon. Ryan, what would you like to say?
Hello there, James. How you doing?
Very good, mate.
I myself voted Remain, but a close family member of mine voted Leave. But for all those reasons, that traditionally gets thrown around, but amongst those is British courts not having power,
yes.
Brussels making the laws and making all the power. So And we usually have sort of more healthy conversation and debates amongst ourselves and try and, persuade one another as to their opinions and whatnot. But then when yesterday happened, I remember yesterday's show, you said either way, whatever the outcome would be, would it change people's mind? And it seems, for my family member in particular, it hasn't. And if anything, they've gone completely the opposite now. And now the British courts have, swung their power and shown what they can do. And apparently now they're all Remainers, and it's all a coup against the Prime Minister and the government to stop Brexit happening.
When the English High Court found that it wasn't in their remit to pronounce upon the prorogation, I'm going to go out on a limb here and suggest that your beloved relative didn't therefore conclude that the English High Court was full of leavers.
No, that was absolutely normal and fine, and nothing to argue against that. But as soon as Boris Johnson's prorogation of Parliament was unlawful, they're all Remainists and want to stop Brexit happening.
So if you asked him or her whether or not British judges have too much power or whether or not they have too little because they've surrendered it all to Brussels, what would they say?
To be honest with you, I would have no idea.
That's what I'm here for, you see. That's what you need. That's what I'm here for. You don't even have to buy the book.
It's rather confusing.
Well, it is rather confusing, and it's a little bit unkind, perhaps, to point out that this is what happens when a cult is created. When the world doesn't end on November the 17th, and you've spent 30 years arguing that it was going to, it's not the fault of the cult leader, it's the fault of everybody else who frustrated his divine will. It's the fault of the EU, it's the fault of Remainers, it's the fault of Parliament, it's the fault of J.K. Rowling, Gary Lineker and Lily Allen. It's never the fault of the cult leaders. And they will be standing up today complaining about judges, complaining about Remainers, complaining about Lily Allen, Gary Lineker, J.K. Rowling and me. They will not be complaining about the man who misled the Queen, misled the Parliament and misled them. And you still love that person. And so you should. But you're going to reach a point where either you agree to stop talking about it or they agree to at least acknowledge reality.
Well, it's frustrating because I have sort of responded with saying, well, had it gone the other way and, Boris Johnson was found to have been lawful with the prorogation and all the courts had said, no, there's nothing for us to look at here.
Yes.
Remainers mostly, I would imagine, on my side, probably would argue against the other way and say, oh, no, they're all wanting to leave and they're all Brexiteers themselves.
Oh,
and it's unfair.
I certainly
to win, maybe.
No, I certainly wouldn't. In fact, to suggest that the National Crime Agency has announced that Aaron Banks has no case to answer in the context of that £8 million donation to Leave.eu, you and I would now have to argue that the National Crime Agency is full of leavers to be on some sort of morally equivalent plane to your relative. And I hate to say this because it's your relative that's on the receiving end of this, Bob, but we're too honest and clever to do that.
Yeah.
And there it is, condescending, remoaning, sneering, metropolitan liberal elites like Ryan in Basildon.
All of us.
I know, it's all of us, mate. And I know that you're a member of the metropolitan liberal elite because the men that own the Ritz Hotel paid people to tell me that you are.
Yeah.
There it is. And so feel free to uncork a couple of those greatest hits when next discussing this with your relative. In fact, I don't think we do this very often. I'd love to know how it works out when you say, so hang on a minute, Dad or Mum or cousin Ethelred, hang on a minute, is it now the case that British judges in British courts have too much power, or do they not have enough power because they've surrendered it all to Brussels? I don't think it can be both, but I'm always delighted to be taken by surprise. 10:41 is the time. You're listening to James O'Brien on LBC. The conversation is as wide-ranging as you want it to be, but it all, of course, dances around the events of yesterday and the broader questions of Brexit. I find myself drawn to the doublethink. I find myself drawn to the really sad state of affairs that has taken root in the minds of people like Ryan's relative, where you voted for Brexit because you believed that our judges and our parliament had somehow surrendered power to, quotes, Brussels, end quotes. You deserve an explanation from the people who told you that about what happened yesterday, but you won't, of course, get it. You won't get that explanation because the people who told you that our judges and our parliament had somehow surrendered power to Brussels hold you in complete contempt. 10:41 is the time. William is in Streatham. William, what would you like to say?
Well, yeah, I mean, I was just touching on what you opened with earlier, James, around whether or not it's made any difference at all, whether Boris is a crook or not. And well, then your salvo lasted about 5 minutes, because I was underlined everything that I thought anyway. Nothing's changed. Nothing is going to change. I was walking my dog the other day, or yesterday, and two lovely people, 70, 75-year-olds, been living in London for 40-odd years. They turned around to me and they said that it's an outrage that Johnson's had to put up with this in the first place. I was like, this happened to Jeremy Corbyn, he would have been slaughtered by the press. There would be calls for him to resign immediately. There have been calls for Johnson, but there's no real evidence.
Well, again, I don't know, and maybe you can help me on this. You sound younger than I am, and not immersed in the news. It's not that hard these days, and not immersed in newsprint as I was as the son of a newspaper journalist. How powerful are they these days? Because everything you say is correct. The whole point about the Supreme Court ruling is that it would prevent all future prime ministers from riding roughshod over Parliament, something that every honest citizen or honest subject of these islands should want, because you could end up with someone in Parliament who you really don't like and blindly trust. So that point there, how many of our heads get turned by what's on the front pages of the newspapers? Because if you go back to 2015, nobody cared about EU membership in nationwide polling. It was, and then suddenly immigration and EU membership, the men that own the Ritz, the men that own the Mail, the men that own the Telegraph, the men that they all decided that this was what they wanted, and lo and behold, here we are.
The thing about papers, people will just go where they want to go, won't they? Their political home is going to be the Sun, and it will be the Sun for the rest of their life. It will be the Guardian for the rest of their life, etc., etc. There aren't very many people that will ever change course. My grandma, bless her heart, she voted Brexit because she wanted to change back to the old, not currency, but the old shillings and what have you.
Well, it is the old currency. Good grief. Good luck to her.
She was reading the Telegraph thinking it was centre, left, whatever.
Well, yes, exactly that. And a number of people I've heard from who started buying the Daily Mail on Saturdays because they really liked the TV guide, and within 6 months were sort of Anne Widdecombe tribute acts. It's genuinely heartbreaking. We can make jokes about it, but that's what happens when you're being groomed and gaslit. Do you know, actually, something has changed? Something quite profound has changed in that 52%, if you want to use that figure, or 17.4 million people, have since yesterday decided that they no longer have respect for the rule of law. That's quite a big deal.
Well, James, before you say au revoir to me, I'm reading a book at the moment on the Third Reich.
Stop it. Okay, carry on.
It was written in 1965 by a guy called William Shirer, who's an NBC reporter in Berlin at the time.
Yes.
And they've started talking about, at least he has, rather, about the breaking down of the judiciary system, the police, everything, the infiltration of it. Now, look, I'm not saying for 1 second, I'm not an alarmist. I'm not saying that, oh my God, prepare yourself for a Farage government and we're all headed, to disaster. But there is an Overton window here that is being, it's being exploited.
The rule of law. Whichever historical precedent you look at, when the rule of law is under attack from politicians, that is the mother of all alarms. And you're right. You're right when you say half the country still can't hear it.
Well, yeah, and that's a real. It's a scary thing, and also people just don't want to care. They don't care anymore. They don't want to listen to it. I'll take you back to the 75-year-old lovely people walking their dogs yesterday. They didn't care. They just thought it was just something to do with Go on, sorry, frustrating Brexit and all that.
No, I won't tire of ever saying that I have nothing but respect and sympathy for their situation. There's no suggestion from me or anybody on this side of the fence that they're all stupid or racist or ignorant. That's what their cheerleaders say that we call them while they're doubling down on the con. But if you are told that fella over there, or that behind that door over there is a fella who wants to come in and nick all your biscuits, then it is not stupid to lock the door or to run away. It's even less stupid to open the door or have a look through the keyhole and see whether there really is somebody there, and if there is, ask him a few questions about what his intentions are. But our very species has survived through the millennia because of the adrenalised fight or flight response to danger. If I shout fire and you run for the fire escape, you are not stupid, but I might be a liar. Boris Johnson has spent his whole life shouting fire. We either lied to you or didn't take the time and energy required to properly understand the issues before telling you which way you should vote in 2016. But rather than admit that and apologise, we would like you to take out your anger on somebody else. Oh, here are 11 Supreme Court judges. Take out your anger on them about the fact that you ended up doing something stupid because people like me told you to. That seems to be the position of much of the right-wing media this morning. Thankfully, I'm here to provide a little bit of balance. And I provide that balance today by asking you this question. Is our Parliament too sovereign, or has it surrendered sovereignty upon the altar of European Union membership? And while you're at it, do our judges in British courts have too much power, as was demonstrated yesterday, or do they not have enough power because they've surrendered it all to Brussels, as these shysters have been claiming for the last 20 years? Because I don't see at the moment how both of those positions can be true. You can't simultaneously have too much and too little. So you're left with another lie, which is that there's some sort of bias or hidden agenda or secret plot. And even journalists... I mean, the point at which the owners of the Ritz started paying people like Boris Johnson and Nigel Farage to tell people like Ryan in Basildon that he was a member of the metropolitan liberal elite, that was the point for me at which perhaps we all should have reached for the alarm button. But it's taken hold now. The use of this word establishment it's endemic. And what does it mean? What is the establishment if the owners of the Ritz aren't in it, and I am? 0345 6060973 is the number that you need. Barry's in Westminster. Barry, make sense of it all in 7 seconds.
Thank you so much, James.
You're very welcome.
James, I'm an alderman now in Westminster, which is a civic role that helps people to become British citizens. And in the last year, that's why I'm ringing on behalf of at the moment.
Okay.
200 odd people, including people from the USSR and the United States, have all applied to become British citizens. So I'm very pleased that the judges in this occasion have made sure that our Constitution and the three things that you say at these sort of ceremonies are that there are three things that make up our society. One of them is the rule of law. Secondly, it is our Constitution. And then thirdly, it is tolerance. Now, I think that's a big thing, tolerance, about how it works. But broadly, I'm pleased on behalf of those people who put all their energies into wanting to become British citizens within our own Constitution, not within the European courts, but within our own Constitution, have actually had that reinforced. Because the last ceremony, which was last week that I stood at, I did say to them, nobody is beyond the rule of law.
Gosh.
And I tried to make that and emphasise it to them. And what I think the judges have now been able to do is just make sure that our Constitution is maintained in the right manner.
That's beautifully put, and with a really powerful perspective as well. I don't know whether... it's not Parliament that's the mother of all parliaments. It's Britain. That's right. I got educated about this a couple of years ago, and when I can't remember who said it, but did that include the separation of powers? Do you think when they called Britain the mother of all parliaments, they must have been referring to the roles that the judiciary, the executive, and the legislature play in tandem with each other? And what we saw yesterday.
Oh, absolutely. And I think the examples of our country has been used across many other countries across the world, which is, I think it's a compliment to us, really, isn't it? I mean, there's lots of things that you could alter to amend and adjust, and I think that is an issue at the moment.
Do you know what it is?
Maybe out of date, who knows?
No, do you know what it is? It's because we have swapped nouns, unspecific nouns, for names. So I don't think anybody listening to this programme, if we had done a phone-in 5 years ago that said something like, should Prime Ministers be allowed to shut down Parliament in order to avoid answering questions about highly problematical legislation, right? I don't think anyone would have said, no, of course they should, James. Of course they should be allowed to shut down Parliament whenever they want to avoid uncomfortable questions. But if I said, should Boris Johnson be allowed to shut down Parliament in order to avoid helpful questions or difficult questions about his utterly unmandated desire to crash out of the European Union at the end of October with no idea or deal, people will say yes. So it's so interesting when you just shift the focus slightly from individuals and people to principles and laws. And what you remind us of, Alderman Barry, is that when you want to become a citizen of these islands, you are blind to who is in the offices or in the various posts, and you are absolutely instructed in the importance of the posts and the principles, not the people who inhabit them.
That's right. And I think that one of the lovely things in these ceremonies, I'm so proud of the people that want to do it.
I bet you are. What a compliment it is to us that people would travel halfway around the world and want to be British.
They spend their time. They probably know more about our constitutional arrangements than I do. I don't know. All I'm saying is that when they go to learn about wanting to become British citizens, they go through a whole series of examination processes, etc. And it's really lovely when they suddenly, you give them the certificate. I can tell you, there is a massive smile on their face about becoming a British citizen.
I went to a party thrown after one of those ceremonies, a mate of mine. And you're right. I mean, it made me feel, I don't know quite what the word is, Barry, almost awkward, because what I took for granted, my birthright, if you like, to this chap, his Polish bloke, to him it was like Christmas.
Oh, absolutely. I'm working with a woman at the moment whose son wants to become, she's Polish, and her son wants to become, and he knows it's going to be, a thing that he's got to go through and work through. It's like having a serious examination in broad terms.
Yes.
But he's delighted to go for it and try and become a British citizen within our structure, not within someone else's.
No, and then everyone who was born with that, right, with that birthright, is if they're still on the Brexit side of the argument and they're accepting the invitation to attack the judges or to believe the nonsense that's been thrown up by all the usual suspects today, they are actively agitating against all of the reasons that make being British close to winning the lottery of life in the context of 20th and 21st century international politics. That's lovely. Thank you, Barry. How do you become an alderman? I'm just glancing at the clock. I haven't got time for another call, so I can ask you.
I was an opposition councillor for many, many years in Westminster.
Right.
And then the other, basically the authority said, when I finished last year, they said, we'd like to make you an alderman. And I've been delighted to do civic duties of this sort, as part of that.
No, I hear you. So as a sort of upstanding citizen, it's one of those offices that the country has. I just don't hear it very often. 10:59 is the time. I played an alderman once in a play in Manchester, Alderman Hawley Artingstall. In Fame is the... No, not an old man. I was only 17. In Fame is the Spur by Howard Spring. Adapted for the stage, I think, by John Chambers. And if anyone listening to this programme saw that, I shall give you the money myself.